folks know, we had convened and started our city council meeting at 6 p.m. so that the city manager could present the FY 2022 recommended budget. All that information is up on the city website. And as with all of our council meetings, if you'd like to go back and watch the recording of that, you'll be able to. So now we will begin the rest of our meeting for this evening, looking at, our agenda moving forward. On Monday night, April 12th, we will be having a special meeting. This meeting will be for presentations on the Takoma Junction redevelopment project. We will have a number of presentations that evening, as well as breakout group discussion sessions afterwards on some tentative topics that we're looking at, such as stormwater, trees, and green space as one topic area, parking, and public space. So we're still developing the agenda for that evening, and we'll have more information up on the city website later this week. Then on April 14th, that will be our regular city council meeting. We'll have the youth council with us that night to do an update, their monthly update. We will have a public hearing on the FY 2022 recommended budget. Our work sessions on the evening of April 14th are the Takoma Junction redevelopment project and a continued discussion of committees. Then on Monday, April 19th, we have a budget work session scheduled that will start at 7:30. Just a note on the Monday night meetings that we have, the one on the junction and the budget work sessions, those are meetings that do not have public comments. We take public comments during our regular meetings on Wednesday night. And then on Wednesday, April 25th, that is a night that the city council is in an administrative function session from 6 to about, I don't know what time. That is, the administrative function sessions are closed to the public, and that is regarding the city manager search. Our next meeting then is on Monday, April 26th, and that again is a budget work session, and a preliminary budget reconciliation items will be considered. Then on Wednesday, April 28th is our regular meeting. We'll have public hearings on the constant yield, the FY 2022 budget, Takoma Junction redevelopment project, and our work session that night is a discussion of the resolution regarding Takoma Junction redevelopment project. Then on Monday, May 3rd, we have a budget work session. It's budget reconciliation. And then Wednesday, May 5th, our regular meeting, we have one voting item, which is a resolution regarding the Takoma Junction redevelopment project. And that's about as far as we get. That's the next month of meetings. Next item we have up is our legislative update. And I think this might be our last regular sort of check-in legislative update. And then we'll have Ann back in a little bit to give us kind of a big overview. But the last couple of days, what's been happening, Ann?
Nothing much. No, that's not right. Hi, folks. There's a lot going on today in quite the marathon session. The Senate wrapped up the police reform bills. The House did the same. It might take a day or two to kind of go through and suss out all that is and isn't in there, what exactly they took from House and Senate versions of the bills. And as I've been saying all along, it's not what everything that strong advocates for strong police reform wanted, but there are many steps in there that are positive. So it's certainly not a one and done kind of fix or anything like that. So, but it was a lot of hard work that went into the product that they do have. On transportation issues, the county delegation bill to lower speed limits, give Montgomery County the authority to lower speed limits, was amended in the Senate. to allow municipalities in Montgomery County to also lower those speed limits. The bill came out of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, hasn't been voted on the floor yet of the Senate, keeping an ear out just to make sure there's nothing funny going on. But we are expecting success there. There was and this might be new to everybody, there was $500,000 in the governor's last supplemental budget. And that was almost $1 billion, and that was the money from the American Relief Act. And there was $500,000 in there for businesses impacted by the Purple Line construction. So that is very good news. In addition, there is a bill that's moving related to, it's called the Transit Safety Act, that includes funding for not this coming fiscal year, but for the year after that and the year after that, 23 and 24, of $1 million for the Purple Line businesses. So I think the needs are being heard, and hopefully some of them will be addressed. With the environment, there's a lot of things going on. The bills that we've the city's been supporting related to trees, also along the Purple Line, has passed. The Community Choice Energy Bill has passed. Changes to standards, regulations around stormwater management has passed. The big one that's still out there is climate solutions. The Senate passed a very strong version of a bill related to goals related to emissions, and various ways to get there. The House is talking about something less strong, but we just got word this afternoon that the House should be voting on it in committee tomorrow morning, and moving it out, and we'll see how, where some of the changes lie. But there's been a real commitment on behalf of Senate and House leadership to get this done. And then finally, there's a lot kind of going on with regard to housing. There's been an emergency eviction prevention bill. There was that has yet came out of the House. A lot of bills have moved out of the House. The Senate has had them backed up, and they will be the next couple of days. We are told by the chairman, Bill Smith, that bills will be moving. We believe that the emergency eviction bill will move. It's not going to fix specifically the tenant holding over lease non-renewal loophole that exists, but hopefully there's going to be an attempt to amend the bill to put conditions on landlords who take emergency assistance money, emergency rental assistance money. So that would benefit tenants. So we're still working on all of that. And then there is a bill that some of you may be aware of. There was a bill introduced to create a right to counsel for low-income tenants. That bill also has been watered down a bit from where it started. It's now a right, not a right to access counsel, or like an access to counsel, not really a right, but it's a start. And I think the idea is, again, building on a good start in the next few years to really help people understand and be able to exercise their legal rights in the landlord-tenant process. So there's still a number of things, the housing stuff and the environment, at least the one major environmental piece, and the speed limit bill still need to to get done. So still a lot to do in these last few days.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. Anyone have any questions? No. All right. Great. Well, we won't see you next week, but we will see you soon. And I'm sure talk to you about the end of the session. So thank you so much, Anne. Thank you very much for joining us each week to give us these updates. We really appreciate it.
Easy to do via Zoom.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you all.
Terrific. So the next item we have is an Arbor Day proclamation. We are supporting Arbor Day 2021 in Takoma Park. I'll read it out. Whereas trees are an important part of the character of Takoma Park and provide many benefits to residents, such as improving air quality, reducing stormwater runoff, lowering summer temperatures, reducing energy use in buildings, removing air pollution, absorbing emissions that contribute to climate change, enhancing property values, improving human health, providing wildlife habitat, and contributing to the beauty of our neighborhoods. And whereas cities play a vital role in promoting and encouraging the protection and planting of trees and other environmentally sound practices. And whereas due to the COVID-19 health emergency, this year's annual Arbor Day celebration and tree giveaway were canceled. And whereas although this community event will not take place, the city will be promoting the planting of trees through the bulk buy program in the spring and fall to encourage residents to plant trees and help maintain a healthy urban forest canopy. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Takoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the council, residents, and staff, do hereby proclaim support for the urban forest in Takoma Park and encourage residents to plant trees and help preserve the tree canopy. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to do a plug for the bulk buy program. I got a lovely magnolia last year, so I think it was very easy to do. So please check that out. All right, the next item we have tonight is a presentation on the Recreation Center redevelopment community engagement. This is the final report that we'll get from Brick and Story. And so I think I'm turning it over to our Economic Development Manager, Samira Cook-Gaines. Am I correct?
Hi, everyone. Yes. I'm just going to take a few seconds just to reintroduce Latoya Thomas and her firm, Brick and Story. Brick and Story has been with us for about a year. It was a year ago, when the whole world shifted, and that was our very last council meeting in person. During that time, we had a conversation about community engagement. We did not know what community engagement was going to look like all of last year, but we were able to extend what was a 6-month contract to a 1-year contract, just to figure out what our world was going to look like and how we were going to be able to reach our residents around a conversation of redevelopment and redevelopment of the Recreation Center. The firm had 2 really large tasks. The first one was something that, everyone kind of assumed, which was, how do we get all voices of the city engaged in the community engagement process? As a city, we currently majority hear from homeowners, and we majority hear from white homeowners. We know that our city does not look like that. We know our city is very diverse. So we were emphasizing getting diverse voices and feedback in the community engagement process. So that was kind of the first piece, really engaging the community on a broader level around the redevelopment of the Recreation Center. The next piece was kind of a lessons learned piece, something that could be left with the city beyond this one process. And that question is, how do we best engage our residents? How do we get folks who've never spoken to the city ever? How do we get them engaged? How do we let them know that they are invited, which is a principle that Brick and Story really taught us and emphasized to us, the idea of inviting people into a process and not just assuming they know they can be there. So really going into spaces, of course, COVID safe, but going into spaces and letting folks know that not only are they invited, but we need their input in the process. So with that said, our final report is coming out the end of this month. These are the final findings. And I'll turn it over to Latoya Thomas, who is the principal and owner of Brick and Story. And before I do, I just want to say just a humongous thank you to Brick and Story. They have pivoted in a way that just embodies what you need to see in a small business. They were not just multifaceted to start with, but they were just incredibly creative in making sure that we hit the goals that we had established in the RFP. So thank you, Latoya, and the team at Brick and Story, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Samira. I really appreciate that. Really nice to see all of you again this evening. You can see I'm trying to get the lighting situation here, but thankfully this is not a model photo shoot or anything. So let me go ahead and share my screen. One moment. All right. All right, so everyone can see the presentation? Awesome. So as Samira mentioned, tonight I'm going to walk you through what is the preliminary version of our final report that's obviously in process right now and will be delivered to the city at the end of the month. So you're going to see a lot of the preliminary recommendations that we're going to be making, as well as a preview of the community survey results. As you know, we shut down the survey on the 31st of March. We are actually still tallying results. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the survey data, so you just understand where we are and what we've learned so far from what we've collected. All right, so just a quick review of our agenda this evening. I'll do a quick update of the process and timeline just to let you know where we are. We'll do a very quick recap of the engagement process. Again, some of this will be highlights from what you've seen previously, but just to reiterate the different activities that we've tried to do over the past year to engage residents in a meaningful way. We'll then dive in a little bit to some of the high-level findings for the community survey. We'll talk through some of the preliminary recommendations that will ultimately go into the final report, and then talk about next steps. So just a recap of our process and timeline. We went under contract last March. Then of course, a global pandemic called COVID happened. We spent a few months ramping up the digital presence for the engagement process, as well as just pivoting our entire approach to support the restrictions that were in place. And then we spent a lot of the fall doing various engagement activities, some in person, mostly virtual, really trying to connect with residents, build networks, build sense of community, and then also just spark the conversation and idea generation around what's possible with this recreation center. And then, as you know, over the past several weeks, really since we entered into 2021, we've had a couple of different activities going on that we'll talk about, including the community-wide art contest and the community survey, as a way to help folks think about, again, visioning for the recreation center, but then also thinking about priorities based on some of the feedback that we heard in the fall. And so we are now in April. We actually added on one last month to the contract specifically because we had incorporated the survey into the March city newsletter. And so we just need enough time for that to do a run. So we are now in the period of time where we're going through all of the survey results, we're developing the final report, and really preparing that final package of recommendations for you to move forward. And then again, a recap of the development process. Summer and fall of this year will be on the city's end to prepare the RFP for the development community, thinking about partner outreach, and then issuing the developer RFP early part of 2022. So just to quickly recap what happened during the engagement process. Again, we did a series of launch events in the fall. We did visioning and goal setting virtual sessions, both with the general public as well as with some targeted groups and organizations. We did what we call pop-ups and pop-ins, where we actually came to certain sites, certain apartment communities in particular, to try to safely gather residents to share information and get feedback. And we also joined in virtual sessions for other groups and organizations to be part of the conversation and to provide or to get feedback from those groups as well. Again, I mentioned the art contest and the survey, which we'll talk more about in a moment. We've also been managing the Engage Takoma Park platform, which lives on a website called Quorum, and been trying to leverage that as an online engagement tool in order to push out information, but then also to engage residents in a different way. We've also been using social media a fair amount, particularly in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 months. That was a pretty useful tool for us with the survey as well, being able to leverage social media ads to spread the word about the survey. We also leveraged existing city networks and resources, such as Parks and Rec and the business community, the schools and other city agencies. And then we've also worked to try to build relationships with various property managers, particularly some of the larger properties throughout the city. This is a quick highlight on the community art contest. We will be running a series of posts through the remainder of the month via Engage Takoma Park and via our social media. So you'll be able to see all of the entries and winners. But I just wanted to highlight quickly, we did have 12 entries, 2 adults and 10 youth entrants. And we awarded 2 grand prize winners, 3 runner-ups, and 7 honorable mentions. And you'll see the images on the right. The top 2 images are 2 of a 6 canvas series of musicians from Andre Miller, who submitted in the adult category. And the bottom image is from a darling girl named Zoe Freeberg, who recommended that we design a dragon roof on top of the new community center. And so, again, we will do a whole showcase over the month of April via Engage Takoma Park, so you can see all of the different entries that were submitted. And all of the winners are receiving Shop Takoma e-gift cards ranging from $20 to $100. All right, now diving into the community surveys, we'll spend a few slides talking about this. So just to recap how we did the survey and why we did the survey. So as I mentioned, we did a lot of conversation in the fall talking about ideas and visions and what folks wanted to see. And then we entered into this phase of figuring out how to prioritize all of these ideas and these wish list items into something a little more concrete. And so we issued a community survey. We ran it for a little over a month, about a month and a half. We did both electronic response submission as well as hard copy submissions with drop boxes. For those of you, I'm assuming everyone on this call has taken the survey, so you know some of the questions that were asked, but obviously we did a spectrum, everything that included usage to access to programming to demographic to design considerations. And then just to quickly highlight some of our distribution efforts, we issued, in addition to the drop boxes and electronic means, we did specifically target outreach to all the schools, to Parks and Rec to issue out through their ActiveNet network, through Blue Dot, through the library's communication channels. We also distributed to somewhere between 25 and 30 multifamily properties throughout the city, either electronic or electronic and hard copy. Several properties actually set up drop boxes that we delivered to them, or they made their own drop boxes to support residents being able to participate in the survey. And then, of course, we partnered with the city to do an insert of the survey in the March community newsletter. So again, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, this data is as of yesterday. We are still tallying survey results. Behind me, I actually have about 50 hard copies that were collected on Monday. And so some of these numbers are likely going to change a little bit, but we'll have a more accurate count, obviously, for the final report. But I did want to at least share where we are based on the information that we have so far, which is all of the digital responses, plus any hard copy responses that we've tallied to date. So we received to date 744 responses. That comes to about 4% of the population. Just as a method of comparison, if you're trying to figure out is that good or bad, A few months ago, for another project I'm working on in Charlottesville, we did a citywide survey. Obviously, the city of Charlottesville is much larger than Takoma Park. We got about 1,200 responses, which was about a 2% response rate of the entire city population. So 4% is actually not a bad number at all. We will be able to fine tune that number a bit at the end of this process, because we do know we have some respondents who were border residents, so they were right on the border of Takoma Park, but outside of the bounds, or they were in the region, but not necessarily in Takoma Park. But that was also a very small percentage. The vast majority of respondents were Takoma Park residents. Some other highlights to note. 154 responses were from Ward 6, so that's about 20% of the responses that we received. 32.6% of 6% of residents responded they had never used the recreation center, which I found to be a really fascinating number and something to think about, as you continue through this development process and as you continue through thinking about how that side of the city is better served, and even how this recreation center can become a bit of a destination for the entire city. We definitely heard in some of our in-person pop-up, we did some survey pop-ups at certain locations to help residents complete the surveys. And we definitely heard, particularly from residents on Maple Avenue, for example, they had never ventured over to the recreation center. They only went to the community center on Maple, even though this recreation center serves the entire city. So it's something just very interesting to note. Some of the top three considerations that would increase usage of the rec center: more than half of the responses said different programming options. More than a third said more convenient hours. And again, almost a third said lower fees and cost for facilities and use of programming. And then more than half of respondents preferred to use the recreation center during the evening time frame. Top 5 preferred community resources. Community garden came out at 39%. Friendly and knowledgeable staff came out at 38.8%, which I thought was a very interesting category to rank so high. Community Wi-Fi, 36%, which I think speaks obviously to the interest in just having access to technology for everyone. 35.4% for gathering space, and then 28.6% for performance space. I think the last two in particular are in line with what we've heard throughout a lot of our earlier outreach efforts, for folks mentioning that they were interested in just access to space that could be used, meeting space, gathering spaces, and the fact that there was not really a lot available when folks needed to get access to spaces. Top 3 preferred educational uses. Almost half the responses said youth programming, which I don't think is a big surprise. Also, almost half the responses indicated an interest in language classes, which I think actually reflects the really diverse nature of the city. And then close to 40% indicated an interest in classes hosted by local colleges and universities. Top 3 preferred economic development opportunities. More than half indicated interest in a cafe or coffee shop. Close to half said rentable community space, again, speaking to that desire to have accessible space that could be used for meetings or other gatherings. And then almost a third indicated an interest in some housing use on site. And then significant responses related to design elements. We asked only a few design questions, again, knowing that you're going to be going into a more in-depth design process later on once you have an architect on board. But more than half of the respondents indicated that the center should be designed sustainably. And again, close to half said that physical design was really important to attracting a diverse array of residents who would use the recreation center on a regular basis. Demographic information. So this is obviously something that we were particularly concerned about as we went through the survey process. So just going through this, demographics by race. So not really surprising, almost 70% of the respondents were white respondents. I was not particularly surprised by that number at all. Close to 20% of the respondents were African-American, identified as African-American, Black, something in that category, which we were actually pleased with that number, particularly given what we know about the very low response rate and low participation efforts of Blacks in the Takoma Park community. The Hispanic and Latinx population was at 9%. That was a low number, and there's a lot of factors into that, which I'll come back to in a moment. We were also very surprised by what's a rather high percentage for Asian American respondents and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, particularly compared to what percent of the population they actually represent, which is a small number and compared to the response rate. Just going back to the Hispanic and Latinx population for a moment, we'll talk about this in some of the recommendations in the upcoming slides, but there were many challenges that we discovered as a team, that we talked about and tried to strategize through as a team. For those of you who participated in the survey, you probably know that we, in addition to the hard copies and the digital platforms, we also did outreach to a number of different organizations. We had a phone hotline number for folks to call, and we actually did have, oddly enough, a Spanish-speaking resident who called the number and was able to get one of our team members to help her take the survey by phone in Spanish. But one of the things, and we had two Spanish-speaking team members on the team with us, and one of whom works in the Hispanic community on a regular basis. A lot of the things that we talked about were the fact that many Hispanic residents may not necessarily get the information from their property managers, and they may not engage with their property managers as extensively as they might engage with the schools, for example. And so thinking about going forward, and again, we'll go into recommendations, but thinking about how can we think about better partnerships with the school system to get to some of those harder to reach populations. We also know that there are identity concerns, security concerns, safety concerns in this community, for many different reasons, for visa and citizenship issues. And so a hesitancy around engaging with government and providing responses to a survey, providing information. And so we want to just be cognizant of that going forward. It's something that we will talk a little bit more about in our recommended strategies for how to move forward in engaging more of this population. I'll also say, just to close out on this particular point, COVID also did not help. This group is definitely one where there's a lot of time and there's a lot of, frankly, in-person trust that has to be built. And so the inability to get in person into a lot of these communities was certainly a challenge. Moving on through demographics, age, I've only highlighted just some of the top respondents here. So we heard the most from those who are aged 25 to 44, and that was almost half of our respondents. And then the remaining, 33.5%, 45 to 64. I was actually very pleased to see 25 to 44 being such a high response rate. That's, on the younger end of respondents for surveys. And so I also know that in that number, not everyone in that age bracket is a homeowner. And so I think that represents a good mix of age, of demographics, and of tenure. And then the last demographic point here, housing tenure, 70% respondents were homeowners, not too surprised by that number, which left around 22% of the renter population, which I actually thought was a pretty good number, again, knowing the challenges that the city has had in engaging with the non-homeowner population. And I think if we talk through engagement strategies, I think that number can go up over time. Again, as more intentional relationship building is done in these rental communities. So now I'd like to dive into a couple of recommendations. Number one, connections and relational capital are key. Make and maintain connections with city stakeholders in order to bring more residents into the public process. So what do we mean by this? So it's really important to think about relationship building and not just around specific events. The thing that I mentioned 2 slides ago was this issue of trust. And I think that just goes across lines of race, it goes across lines of class. If we're talking about doing effective engagement, we're talking about getting residents in Takoma Park to trust in government and to trust in the civic process and to trust that their opinions and their ideas matter, regardless of what they look like or how much money they make or what part of the city they live in. And to get to those folks, you've got to be able to build relationships of trust. The great thing with Takoma Park is that you've got folks who have built those relationships. And so when you think about property managers who are managing the day-to-day at some of these multifamily properties, both rental and multifamily condo buildings, When we think about the city agencies and the links that school principals, school teachers, librarians have to your greater population, we think about community partners like church leaders, resident leaders at certain properties. These are folks that the city can begin to make deeper relationships with, who can ultimately help be the bridge between the city and these other populations. This last question that I put on here is, who maintains the relationships beyond this effort? And I think that's a very serious question for the city to think about as we, Brick and Story, wrap up our efforts. Who maintains the relationship going forward? And we're going to get into this in point 2, but it can't just be one person. I know Grace Wiggins does a lot of work from the housing director seat, but it can't just be a Grace. There has to be a team of folks who represent the city and who are taking ownership of community relationship building and community engagement, which leads me to point number 2. Hire designated city staff to maintain and nurture stakeholder relationships across the city. Our team is making the distinction here, cultural ambassadors and community liaisons rather than language translators. Yes, you have people in the city who speak different languages. The vast majority of people do speak English. We do know there are certain subsets who, obviously, Spanish-speaking community, and many folks in the Spanish-speaking community are bilingual, but not all. And then we know there are other languages represented. So this is less about language. This is more about making a connection at a very basic human and relational level. And so that means thinking creatively about hiring people who have community engagement, community building skill sets, who are the types of people who deal with people and deal with relationship building in their day-to-day, and who can also represent different cultural perspectives and be able to relate to residents from across a wide array of backgrounds and interests. We think investing in staff who can support those efforts, who can support the outreach to multifamily properties, who can support the relationship between city government and the other departments in the city that work with people, such as schools, such as library. Making those connections is going to be really key for being able to do effective engagement going forward. One last point that I just realized I did not mention under point number 1, but that ties into all of this, is thinking about how you better streamline city communications with the other city agencies that you have. One challenge that we definitely saw was around public information sharing, and we know that's a thing everywhere in the US, but thinking about how can you easily get information shared between agencies for different initiatives so that each time that you do an engagement process, whether it's small or large, that you're not always reinventing the wheel, that you're not sending people on a bit of a wild goose chase, trying to find the right person to call to get connected to a building or a contact list or a distribution list. And then considering a centralized platform for city communications, which we'll talk a little bit more about going forward. Point 3, identify community liaisons who can work specifically with the Spanish-speaking community. So related to point 2, we do think that of the staff that you hire, you should invest in a few folks that can specifically work in the Spanish-speaking community. These are folks who will work not only with your property managers at different buildings, but also with local businesses and schools to connect to Spanish-speaking residents and to make a deeper connection and relationship of trust. And then also, again, they can help to maintain those relationships with partner organizations that may already be working with these populations. Number 4, maintain Engage Takoma Park and improve linkage to other city platforms. And so obviously Engage Takoma Park was procured as a way to have an online digital platform that was beyond just putting information out on social media, but that also provided a very managed and controlled forum for resident engagement. And so we've, in the year that we've been working, we've been trying to get that platform built up. But once we finish, if no one's nurturing that, it's not going to do the city any good. And so thinking about what does maintaining Engage Takoma Park look like, not just for the recreation center, but then for other city-related efforts going forward. And then with that, thinking about how do you integrate Engage Takoma Park into the city communications? How do you integrate it into the city website and social media platforms so that it looks as though it's connected, because it is connected. I know I've mentioned in an earlier presentation that one of the challenges we did have in the very beginning was that some folks saw Engage Takoma Park on social media and then went to the website and thought it was a scam or thought it was something not affiliated with the city. And so we need to think about how do we have these many different faces of the city of Takoma Park government. Yes, there's the official, very government-focused aspects that live on the city website, but there's also this very community-focused effort that's being shown through Engage Takoma Park. How do we think about how we can link those two? How do we also think about how do we streamline the communication that happens between Engage Takoma Park and the city's communication platforms? Number 5, invest in time and a variety of tools for future engagement and commit to an intentional citywide engagement framework. So a couple of things here. Virtual engagement, which we obviously had to go into because of COVID, and I do think will continue to remain in place in most of my work going forward. It does work, but we also know that it works for some better than others. And so thinking about how do you find a balance between creating virtual moments for engagement and in-person moments for engagement. And to that point, bring engagement to the people. And I know this is something I've certainly said before, and I've said to many other clients, in normal times, and even in not so normal times, folks don't always want to go to a meeting at 7:00 on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. I have some clients where some of their meetings have gone to 2 a.m, their council meetings, and most people aren't going to sit through that. And so if we have to think about how are we going to effectively engage folks, it will mean not always expecting folks to come to City Hall to learn about what's happening in their community. It will mean hopping in the car, hopping on the bus, going to different properties, going to different street corners, and bringing the city process to the people. And again, this goes back to many of the earlier points, it's an investment. It's an investment and a commitment in time. It's not something that is going to be, one day, day 1, you decide you want to do a process, and day 30, you have all of this trust built in. It is something that has to be nurtured over an extended period of time, and it has to be consistent. Trust, as everyone knows, comes with consistency of action. And so that's probably one big thing I would encourage is thinking about what the council can commit to beyond this work, and how that commitment can show itself in ongoing, consistent action going forward. And then the final recommendation here is having an honest recognition, which I think was shown in the RFP that was issued for this contract, of this tale of two cities problem that Takoma Park really does have. I think back to the launch event that we did at the Recreation Center, and a comment that was made by a local priest at a nearby church who said, "Thank you for inviting me and thank you for asking me my opinion, because no one ever has." And he's probably not the only person in Takoma Park that feels that way. And so I think there needs to be an honest recognition by the city that not everyone experiences the city of Takoma Park in the same way. Not everyone has access to city amenities and civic engagement in the same way. And that's part of why we're having this engagement conversation. That's part of why there's been an engagement problem. How do we think about getting rid of this two-city problem and really starting to build relationships so that that you have folks in other parts of the city, folks who are not necessarily located in downtown Takoma Park, folks who are not homeowners, folks who are very much on the edge of Takoma Park geographically, feeling as though they are part of the city and that they're not on the outskirts, getting the leftovers. And the last point on this is, does civic leadership reflect the diverse community that is Takoma Park? I think that one is pretty self-explanatory, but folks will engage when they see themselves in leadership and in the process. And I think that's just something to think about going forward, not just at the level of council, but then any other committees and boards that are established for various city processes. There has to be intentionality with who you bring to the table. Next steps. So you'll see on the right-hand side just a preview of the design of the report. So it will be quite colorful and quite informative for you. So where we're going from here, so we're rather busy this month trying to get the report wrapped up. We are also planning some virtual sessions to recap what these priorities are that we've heard about in the survey and to talk through some of these recommendations in a public sphere. We will plan for a late April public webinar to be recorded and also posted. So if folks can't make it, they can always check it out at a later date and time. And then we'll be working with Samira to schedule a presentation for city staff as well. And then again, the final report will come out at the end of the month. And that will provide the overview of the engagement process, deeper dive into the full survey results, final recommendations for next steps, and again, a bit of a recap of the overall process. So with that, that is the presentation for the evening, and I will open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think we lost you.
Oh,
there you are. Great. Thanks, LaToya. I'm going to have Councilman Searcy go first. Kick us off.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for not only being flexible in light of the pandemic, but offering some really helpful recommendations on how we engage the community going forward. And I think that your recommendations have broader implications than just the rec center development, because I think, quite frankly, any project lives and dies by buy-in from the community. So whether it's a decision about whether to put in a community garden or, just leave the space green, right? If we don't have a way to make sure that we're able to meaningfully engage the community around that question, right, of what is it people want, then we stand a real possibility of leaving people behind or having folks be really upset and they're against the project now and forevermore because we didn't put in, the right kinds of gardening boxes. So I think that the information that you're providing is really, really helpful in that regard. So there's a couple of things. One, thank you so much for the survey results. I know that some people watching may say, oh, we did another survey. We did one before. The responses that you all received was 2 times what we received previously. I took a look. We did a survey back in 2015. I think we only had about 380 people respond. So the fact that you've had over 700 to respond to this one is a real testament, and really puts me in a better position to feel more comfortable with the results, enough to say, there is a demand for some sort of coffee or different type of cafe model that we can figure out some way to incorporate into the rec center ultimate design. So I did have a chance to participate in a couple of the visioning sessions. And I know that there were more conversations that were had about thoughts around design. And I know it's a very squishy place. And I know for the one that I participated in, participation was not very high. There were just a couple of people there. Did you have enough participation in some of those more design-focused visioning sessions to where you're able to the final report will kind of highlight some of those things? Or is your recommendation more around, let's figure out how to engage the community more and get that level set and then start having these more design-focused conversations? I was just wondering.
Sure. So, and I don't remember the number of, it's something I can go back and pull just because, again, it'll be part of the final report. We had, when we did the 12 or so virtual visioning sessions, over that span of time, as you said, we had some sessions that were probably as low as 3 or 4 people. We had some that were a bit more organized because they were organized by groups, and those may have had 12, 15 people in them. So I would say we probably had somewhere between 40 and 50 participants throughout the entire process. We also had a really wide range of input around design. I would say that we had probably a lot of folks in the middle. We had a few folks on the extreme. The extreme ends being, let's go super modern, super funky. Let's just knock it out the park, be as innovative as we can. That's one end. The other end was, let's be super conservative. Let's just put a box there. Like, let's just make sure we have a box with a door, put a bunch of uses in that box, see what we can do. And then you had a lot of folks in the middle who by seeing the images that we showed, were able to think about, oh, wow, I never thought about using like this color or this kind of material, or the fact that, thinking about how to integrate sustainable elements like renewable materials, things like that is actually pretty important to me. Where I think we've landed is, and again, I'll go back and kind of go through the data on that. I think there's definitely a lot of room for more conversation around design. I think we've only really just touched the surface with it. But where I do think we've gotten is getting folks to think about the possibilities that exist and getting folks to be responsive to things that they like, things that excite them. And that's what we'll really try to share as part of this kind of design summary are things, and they're not always tangible things, but like a lot of things that came up were this idea of light, this idea of having spaces where you can bring a lot of light in and people don't feel like they're in a closed cave. Thinking about those kinds of elements that doesn't necessarily tell you how the building will look, but it speaks to, what would be key design elements for an architect to consider.
Yeah, that's helpful. And some of the recommendations that you made around ways to improve community engagement and outreach. In your experience, would you recommend that we kind of establish some of these either positions or kind of get that infrastructure in place before moving forward with things like the RFP and bringing on an architect and kind of going down this path? Are these some things that you think we could perhaps do simultaneously? So while we are trying to put out an RFP to kind of bring on an architect on board, while simultaneously really trying to figure out, okay, so how can we better engage our Spanish-speaking residents in that vicinity? I'm just trying to get a feel for, because what I don't want is for us to fall behind in addressing some of the community engagement points that you've raised and move forward with, a RFP and kind of bringing someone on board. And then there's this disconnect where we're not able to engage the community around the development in a timely way so that we're able to get their feedback and buy-in so that we can move the project forward. I don't know if it makes sense, but.
Yeah, no, it's something I would personally recommend doing it simultaneously. I would not stop this process because just from what I've gathered in the last year and some change, folks have been waiting a long time to see something. And so I think you don't want to be in a position where you're finding an excuse to yet again delay a new opportunity coming to this community. I think that is certainly something that you can run simultaneously. And I think there are certainly some intermediary steps, with the team that you have, as you guys are starting to kind of think about what does additional staff look like? Who can we start to bring on? It can be a bit of a brainstorming conversation. Certainly, Samir and I will be talking anyway, just as we wrap this process up, but maybe where are some initial inroads that the city can start to make as you're starting to think about bringing on additional staff to support this effort? Who are some folks that maybe we've worked with in the process over the last year that might be the good places to start, start just building that connection, even with a Samir or a Grace or someone else who's on staff, while you're also building the team from there.
And I'll just add that by using the digital platform, we were really trying to also capture engagement. When you use Facebook, for example, you see comments, you see likes. That is the extent of who's engaged. I mean, you can kind of see who your friends are if they're using their real names, et cetera. On the online platform, we have over 300 residents who have signed up to get continual updates around the recreation center. So we are hoping that that one project is kind of the gateway project for engagement, right? It's the lower level kind of, everyone knows what a rec center is. Not everyone knows what a rec center can be. And that's the kind of fun engagement piece. So we are hoping that where Brick and Story has started that process, we can use that internally to leverage more or continued engagement.
Great. And one other thing, just an ask, when looking at the data, it would be great if we had a way of seeing what is it in terms of the uses that those individuals who never gone to the rec center before, what they want versus everyone else. Because I often wonder is, for those who've never gone to the rec center, is it because it doesn't serve a need and they want something that may be different from the people who are using it? And so how do we, to that recommendation of trying to make this a community-wide resource, how do we make sure or figure out how to best address those? So if there's a way to run some crosstabs to see how some of those disparities exist, that would be great.
Okay. Can do that.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate this work, and this has been really, really, really useful information.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm just going to actually pick up where Councilwoman Searcy just left off, because that was one of the notes I wrote down, that I think having some crosstabs looking at the survey data would be really helpful. I think the split between homeowner and renter is not reflective of the community. And I'd really like to look at are there differences between what people who rent in the city versus who own a home are looking for in the rec center. I think that would be really interesting to look at. And one of the other things, and I apologize, I don't know if it was in the slides, but is there a way in the survey I know we had Ward 6, and maybe look at Ward 6 residents or even folks who live closer to the rec center versus the rest of the city. I know that was one of years ago when we did the other survey, as Councilwoman Searcy said, we didn't get nearly as much participation, but that was actually one of the things that we did look at before, which is, what do the folks who live really close by want versus others? Not to say like they get everything, but it's just, I think it would be helpful to know, is there a difference in what people are looking for in that? So
Mayor Stewart, I know we broke it into wards. Are you requesting that information by ward? Because we didn't exactly do.
We could just do Ward 6 and everybody else. I mean, that's okay.
Yeah. And what we've done with the data is, so we did not ask the ward question in the survey because we make the assumption that not everyone knows what ward that they're in, because we just know some people just don't know. But we've been geocoding the locations based on the addresses that have come in. So we also, we acknowledge that some folks did not provide addresses primarily for the hard copy versions. I think we may have required that question for the electronic version. But so for what we have, though, we've been able to classify residents by ward, as well as what we call border residents. So folks who are literally right on the border of a street that is shared by the city and who may very well be leveraging city amenities, but are not within the city limits.
Yeah. Let's see, I had Councilman Dabala and then Councilman Kostick.
Yes, thank you so much for this. This is really great. And thank you for the special attention for some of the smaller Ward 2 buildings that required individual runs to get surveys out and stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I had some of the same questions. I zeroed in on two things as you talked, the survey being one of them and what else we might tweak out of it that would be useful. So I won't repeat what everybody else said. And the recommendations strike me as so much richer than I had thought we were getting. This is great. This is a lot, and I'm interested in what the staff reaction will be when they are presented this. And I'm particularly wondering if, I don't know who you were planning to invite, but I would think that a lot of the recreation and library staff would really want to know about these recommendations and how they apply to what they all are doing. So that's just a thought there, not just department heads, but people who actually do this stuff. I was struck by your comment that, because I have noticed over the years that each department has its own way of doing things, and some departments have got great outreach into some of the diverse communities in Takoma Park, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. So that was really interesting that you commented on that. And I really am going to remember not everyone experiences the city the same way, because I have certainly discovered that as I've been walking around too. When you do the geocoding, some parts of Ward 2 are really quite close to the rec center.
Mm-hmm.
And people tend to use the rec center a lot. So just maybe think about it when you break out the close part. But overall, thank you. It's going to take me a while to absorb this. So leave a phone number.
Absolutely. I mean, we're still absorbing the data now. We just shut down 7 days ago, and I literally have, I'm going to show you, I've got drop boxes sitting in my dining room with hard copies we've not inserted into our database yet. So yes, we're still digesting as well.
And Councilmember Dabala, as Latoya and I talked about, the city council is literally the first folks to see this information, aside from myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But what we talked about is not just sharing with the community, which is important to build the trust, right? Did you hear what I said? And did you capture what I said? And do I see back or hear back what I said or what I offered? So part of that trust building. The other piece really was, for me, and I appreciate you saying that, Councilmember Dabala, it really was, all of it falls to staff. Execution, implementation, the budget, right? Just having who on our staff now owns community engagement. Who? I mean, currently, we can all decide where we think in our minds it sits, but that is also why I had envisioned a presentation to the senior leadership team, all of the rec staff, so everyone at rec, and everyone at the library. So, and if you have any thoughts about, where else that should go, that's who I was intending on sharing, doing an actual presentation, but of course, sharing with all city staff that this was available and it's on the website, and providing the link.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much. This has been really useful. I knew there was one other question. So one thing that would be helpful would be to know specifically on the survey, because you did get great results, what techniques you recommend the city do again when we do surveys to bolster the numbers and the types of people who are reached, so that we can replicate what worked this time. You don't have to tell us now, but
that's actually an easy one I can answer now, but I'll put it in the report too. Social media ads. We saw a lot of movement through Facebook ads. When we first launched the survey, we actually had to do a shift because we realized we were only covering a mile radius from the rec center, which meant we were leaving out a portion of the city. So we had expanded to 2 miles about halfway through. But for probably the first 20, 25 days, 20, 30 days of a 45-day survey process, up until the last couple of days when we closed the survey, we were seeing a steady intake of somewhere between 10 and 25 surveys a day, just from a push on ads.
Wow.
So that, I think we underestimate Particularly among the adult population, particularly among adults over the age of 30, Facebook is still a thing. Under 30, Facebook is like dinosaur land, but over 30, Facebook is still a thing. And so it's certainly a tool that can be leveraged really creatively, and that's where the ads really helped. The drop boxes also got substantially more use than I had even planned on. I was really surprised by the police station drop box. We didn't have a whole lot of submissions go there for the art contest, so I didn't have a lot for the survey. But I've definitely collected. The first pickup that I did probably had 35 hard copies in it. The second pickup that I've got at my dining table has probably another 35 or 40. And then we had, I would say there are certain property managers throughout the city who are very, very involved in their communities, in their building communities, and requested a Dropbox, requested hard copies, or at least requested 10 versions where they could make Xerox copies, set up Dropbox stations, and we're checking the boxes every couple of days, so the Dropbox is also, and frankly, the distribution of hard copies. I mean, Lord knows how many trees we've killed in this process, but, between actually, me and my Honda driving around, dropping off several hundred hard copies to different properties, as well as the use of the newsletter, which I also think reached a lot of people, both homeowners and renters. I even heard from folks on Maple Avenue and some of the buildings there who had actually gotten the survey via the newsletter. So yeah, there's some existing tools that you have that are great. And then there's some other tools that you can just integrate in for that additional push.
Thanks.
Yeah. Latoya, I think that would be really helpful too in the final report to highlight that.
Sure.
We do get questions, we're doing our budget every year. Like, do you still need a newsletter? And the city staff does push that the newsletter, because that is our way of reaching everyone. But I think, and also to the extent that that's possible, is kind of helping to identify, those buildings that we, are doing the outreach, or if they're in particular, for the groups, particularly the Latinx and Hispanic community that you talked about. I know that has been a struggle in the city to connect with members of that community, because unlike, our, let's say, Ethiopian community or others that have, networks that the city has been able to kind of like tap into and build relationships. There isn't as many organizations like in the city or groups that among that community. But if you have found different groups or other ways, I think having that like in an appendix of the report so that we can build upon that in the future, and also double check it against what we already know. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you raised, which I think is an excellent point, is like the schools. And like, I know Councilman Kostick has talked about this, like, us doing a better job connecting with PTAs. But one of the things that we have been doing more of is connecting with the local school principals.
Right.
How do we build on that and that kind of stuff? So I think that would be really helpful to know as well. Let's see, I think Councilman Kostick was next.
Thank you so much for the report. And this is just really fascinating. I think both the information about specifically the rec center and also the broader outreach and what we can do differently. This is incredibly helpful, and I'm really looking forward to diving into the report specifically. The mayor just mentioned one of the things I was going to touch on, which was the connections with schools. And I think that's a really, really important point, because there are a lot of families that have a strong connection and trust with the school system already. So the more that the city can tap into that and be able to provide information and do outreach in that way, I think the better. And that will help us reach a broader range of the community through the school system. I just had two kind of questions, one related to the rec center and one more broadly. With regard to the rec center, and it might have just been some of the specifics that you highlighted in the presentation versus the report, but it seemed to me that a lot of the uses that you mentioned that people were interested in didn't necessarily fall into kind of the traditional sense of a sort of physical exercise activity related, sports complex type of rec center. You mentioned meetings, just gathering space, performance space, those types of things. So either tonight and or in the report, I'd be really interested in finding out more about whether the demand is actually for more of those other things or some combination of those things, and where those kind of fall in terms of the demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it's definitely looking like a combination. So, we obviously only pulled out some very high level numbers. And most of those questions where we asked about programming, we gave folks the choice to select up to 3 or up to 5. And so I was just showing kind of where we heard the most responses, but we also heard, just as we saw the interest in cafe space or meeting space, there was certainly interest in like fitness rooms or fitness equipment, for example. Certain specific exercise classes like bone builders for seniors, things like that. And so the report will be able to actually dive into all of those. You'll be able to see what the response rates were for each of those line items. Because there was obviously, if you've seen the survey, there's like a large menu that we gave folks to choose from. So I would definitely say that you're going in the direction of a combo program based on what people are saying.
I think Councilwoman Searcy wants to jump in. Sorry.
Yeah. So one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is the intersectionality of a lot of different things, right? So where the rec center is located is also in a part of the city where we have zero public space. Right? So the only public space, you don't have a gazebo.
Yeah.
You don't have BY Morrison. You don't have, like, right now, if you need space, you block off Ann Street and you hope for the best, or you go down to Becca Lilly and you do what you can. The rec center, if you need indoor public space, is the only space. So that's something that I think, for the council, as we start to talk about public space management and open space and what we have, that's something to keep in mind, because I actually was not surprised when I saw that, because I know the residents in the immediate vicinity, even, even the CDA, it's, hey, if we need to have an indoor business market, where do we do it? You have to use the rec center because that is the only space that's available. So I think that might shed some light on, and maybe it is the rec center does that, but it could also be that we start to have some hard conversations about public space in the vicinity of the rec center as well, with the idea being, let's try to create more public open space for public use, which we currently don't have that much of.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. My other question is more broad, and you mentioned committees, and that's actually something that we're talking about a little bit later tonight. We've been working on a process of trying to rethink our city committees and improve them and make them more representative of the community. And so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts based on your work on this effort, what we could do to bring some of that into our committee structure and think more about how we do committees in light of some of the findings that you found here.
Yeah, I think the first question is, how do you recruit residents for committees? Because I think looking at the recruitment process is really where to start. If the recruitment process is a posting on the city's website that says, we're accepting applications for the play committee that's due, these applications are due in 30 days. Well, you've already narrowed the population of folks who are going to respond, because it's assuming folks that check out the city website for information. It's assuming folks who have online access. It's assuming folks that speak English. It's assuming a whole variety of factors. It's assuming folks who even know that the committee exists in the first place. And so I think thinking about the recruitment is number one. Number two, and maybe this should really be number one, is, I think there's something to be said for putting some kind of structure in place for who should sit on committees. Again, this is me not being part of the city government talking here, but if you can create a committee where you're saying, we know that we need to have, at least half the committee represent renters. We know that we need to have, whatever percent of the committee or so many residents who, represent these specific populations or particular areas of the city, age groups, thinking about what sorts of things you can put in place as basic parameters for who sits on committees so that the committees don't consistently look the same each time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the presentation. As everybody said, it's really interesting, both from the point of view of specific issues concerning the rec center and then the broader application. So I'm really glad to have all the information. And just had a few questions. One of the things that struck me, and I realize you only gave us a kind of a taste of the findings. And so if the answer is we don't have this yet, that's fine. We can get it later. But it was interesting that the number of people who had never been there, and you mentioned you talked to some about that. And so I was wondering two things. One, when people were talking about the programming that they wanted and the facilities there, how much did they actually know if they'd never been there? And was one of the reasons they hadn't been there that transportation is difficult to get there? Because we've talked at times about, could there be more dedicated buses or something like that that could take people back and forth? So how much of it was based on, I know what it's like and I don't go there because of that, versus I don't really have any way of getting there, and so I don't know about it. And I don't know whether that's even apparent from the results.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if we'll be able to, so we do have obviously a transportation question. We've not delved into that question in detail yet. From some of the folks that we spoke with, I will say that a number of folks that we chatted with, the proximity to Maple Ave, as well as the more what seemed to be more attractive offerings at Maple Ave, were the two biggest things that we heard around why folks maybe had never used the recreation center, particularly if they lived in closer proximity to Maple Ave. For them, Maple Ave was their rec center.
Right.
And so I think that gets to just the programming conversation. Now, that's obviously very different from, folks who live on the rec center campus, who live across the street. That is their rec centers, there's the proximity, they know it's there. But even there, a lot of those folks were complaining about programming and feeling like there were maybe more limited options or more restrictions on facilities than at Maple.
Well, that certainly makes sense. And I do agree also with what Councilmember Kosick said about how much of the interest from respondents was not about, where can I go to weightlift or play basketball, but just the need for public space. And I think that's true even in other parts of the city, but more so there. So that's certainly something that we should look at. Just on the survey results also, do you know yet, or will you know later, were the focus group responses different from the survey responses? Because I'm also wondering if that gets into some of the language barrier questions and other things that you touched on. And it would be interesting to know about that.
Yeah, we don't necessarily know that yet. I mean, the thing that I'll also highlight is, what we did in the focus groups was a little more idea generation. And so there were certainly some, I would say particularly some programming elements that came out a lot, because we built a lot of the survey off of what we had heard in those visioning sessions, particularly around some of the programming elements. A lot of that wish list came from what we'd heard. If anything, I think the survey probably fine-tunes a lot of what we heard in those visioning sessions, probably with the exception of like the design components. We'll probably have more feedback around design elements. So we'll show the balance, the balance there in the report.
And just one other, stepping back. So on the broader questions, and you talked about the tale of two cities, and that's certainly something I think we all experience. And it's really not very far from where I live or people who live near the community center, and to the other, as we think of it, the other farmers market. I'm sure Councilmember Searcy thinks our farmers market over here is the other one, but it's close. You can get there really easily. You can get to the rec center really easily if you have a vehicle, but it seems like there's a distance that isn't just, the miles. And you seem to be suggesting that it was some of the barriers that we see were less about, when you're talking about engagement, less about language. And so I don't know if that means it's about economic or racial or ethnic, or what do you attribute to it, or what are the things we should focus on in trying to break it down, I guess is what I would say. You talked about the importance of ambassadors, and we even highlighted, I think, the concept of ambassadors when we did our annual priority setting. So there's a recognition of that, but even if you hire them, what is it that they're trying to do, I guess, is kind of what I'm wondering.
Sure. To be completely direct, I think the city needs to take a really hard look at if it's approaching civic engagement in a racially equitable way. Are we really intentionally bringing people of all races, of all classes to the table? My guess, just knowing what I started with a year ago, is no, and that's part of why I'm at the table now.
Yeah.
I think there is, I think there's probably a lack of awareness, and I would certainly encourage the city to explore maybe even deeper trainings outside of what the city has. There are many organizations out there that do trainings around equity, and bringing that sense of awareness to communities. But I think it's very much a sitting down and taking a really honest, hard look at what are the systems that the city of Takoma Park has in place, and are those systems perhaps exclusionary? Maybe not by intent, or maybe by intent. It could be a mix of both.
Right.
That's the thing. I think there's a very big awareness and a reckoning it's happening everywhere. I think it has to happen in the city of Takoma Park. And I think, sitting down, I think you guys as council are in the ideal position where you can sit and take that hard look together as a council, and start to kind of see where are the gaps? When, for example, back to the committee question, when we only post a committee application on a website that we know only a certain number of people and a certain type of person in Takoma Park checks and accesses, we may not be intentionally saying that we don't want other people in the city to participate in those committees, but we sure aren't making an effort to invite those people to participate. And so, it's somewhat, again, is it intentional? Is it unintentional? It's probably a little bit of both.
But it's going to require intentionality to address it in any case.
Absolutely.
Right? And so you seem to suggest that hiring people would be an important part of it. Do you see that as, and this is my last question, do you see that as it should be permanent employees? Should it be, should we get Brick and Story to do another year? I mean, what are we talking about in your view?
Yeah, no, so I love working with all of you. So I think you need to have embedded city staff. I think you need to have embedded city staff who can wear the government badge and who can look like the people in your city, who can start to build that trust between your communities and government in a way that a consultant can only start to do. But I think it is a committee of staff. I also think it's a commitment to building capacity, because the reality is that you don't have the capacity right now to do effective engagement. I know how stretched Samira has been. I know how stretched Grace has been. They're not enough. You don't have the capacity in place to be able to maintain long-term engagement.
Yeah. No, I agree. And Samira is there, and I think it would be unfair to expect her to certainly be part of this, but not to make this her next big thing to work on its own.
What I will say, Councilmember Kovar, and thank you for that question, because I do think that the right questions get the right answers and they get to what we need to hear. So thank you for that question. In my career and in my journey, community engagement has been so pivotal in development, that development, redevelopment, whatever you want to call it, in economic development. There is a piece, my entire focus of my career has been community economic development. So when the rec center became a part of my work, the first thing I knew I needed was one, I needed more help, but the first thing I knew I needed was community engagement in a very intentional way. And over the past year, prior to the pandemic, I was one of 4 staff folks who were a part of the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, the GARE cohort. And what I'll emphasize is kind of just to kind of support what LaToya just said, this idea of unintentional exclusion. The vehicle of committees has been seen as exclusionary, as purposefully exclusionary. So even as, and what I love about the council is you guys tackle the hard stuff. So this is the hard stuff. So as you talk about committees, just the concept has been seen as not racially equitable, and trying to tweak around the edges of something that doesn't actually serve a fully engaged purpose. Now, is there a purpose? Sure. Is there a place? Sure. But I do want to emphasize this piece around equity, and the fact that, you know, you guys, long before it was the buzzword, were after this. You were after this thing for our city. So I just wanted to put that additional piece out there, and let you know that we can't move forward in economic development without intentional community development. It just, I mean, it doesn't work. We can all think of at least one scenario where it doesn't work, or you've seen something or read something, and economic development has to be community economic development. And everyone has to understand why economic development is important. People, our residents have to understand that, yes, we do need more space and more buildings because our businesses have no way to grow. You can't talk to your economic development manager about business retention when the minute a business gets big enough to hire someone, they move on the other side of the border because they have better, newer, more modern space, and we don't have it. So just the entire kind of engagement is more than just tell me what you think, but it's also an educational piece to it, where you want to educate all of our residents around what it means to run a city, and to run a city that's for everyone.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and I think it will dovetail nicely with what we're talking about later with the committee discussion. So I appreciate that. Thanks to both of you.
Great. And it is already 9 o'clock, but I do want to, I just thank you, LaToya and Samira, for what you just said. You know, this is an issue that we've been talking about. And it's nice to have your, you know, professional, and sometimes it's nice to have someone who works with us well, but is coming from the outside to give us another perspective, I think is always really helpful. So thank you for that. And I don't expect an answer from this tonight, but it's something I love your thoughts on at one time. And this would even be something I would love when we both can actually sit down and have coffee together in the future. One of the things that I have been thinking a lot about in the past year, particularly under COVID, is what do we actually even mean by engagement? And do we need to also just clarify that at certain times we mean input? We need to get people's input on something, and maybe that's a survey or something else. and looking at the spectrum of what engagement truly means is that, and then there are other times when we need collaboration, partnership with a group of residents. So, like, for example, there are some things we're doing right now in the city. One is, having surveys and things like that. And I think that is input because it's almost a one-way, versus like the task force we have on public safety, where people are really digging in, and we, I think that's a place where we were very intentional about thinking about, who is going to serve on that task force and how to make it inclusive. But I guess, like there's a two very, very different things, and there are two very different asks that we have of people in the community. So that's just something I've been thinking about, like as we're looking at how we can do this much better, and especially in a much more equitable way, is also thinking about what do we mean by engagement?
Yeah, no, and I think, we can certainly have a longer conversation, but I think the short answer is, I think it's all engagement. I think it is the caring what someone else thinks, and the desire to want to hear someone else's voice, no matter how small the question, whether it's a 2-question survey or it's we want you to be involved in this task force for the next 6 months to help us strategize. It's really, again, go back to this word invitation, it's really inviting folks to the table and saying, the city wants to hear from you, here's why, and then making vehicles available for people to participate in that public process, to feel as though they are part of the body public that we talk so much about. So yeah, I think it's all engagement.
Great. Councilmember Smith, and then we're going to close it up because it's getting late for LaToya and everyone else.
Ms. Thomas, I'll just say thank you for the report. I appreciate your recommendations, and all I can say is we shall see.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again for everything. And thank you, Samira, for this tonight. And great. We look forward to seeing the final report.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Great. All right. We're a little behind tonight, so I apologize to folks who have been waiting for public comments, but we'll begin those now. And I think I'm checking to see who's the...
Mayor Stewart, so of the people who signed up to comment, we have Sue Miller and Robert Anderson, who are actually on the meeting. So in that order.
Okay, we can start then. Great. There's Ms. Miller. Great.
Hi, good evening, Sue Miller, Ward 3. The moment has come to discern whether this is a safe junction plan, a wise junction plan, an equitable junction plan for our public land. As residents, we want to be of service to you, our council, as you approach this crucial task. Some residents have spent hundreds of hours immersed in hundreds of plan documents over the years and recently, because these are our streets and our neighborhoods. And we ask you to allow us to share with you what we have learned. Tonight, I also ask for clarification on how the junction review process will work to assure the transparency, objectivity, and thorough review that these plans require. So this is my understanding so far. Everyone's quite confused, but someone, I think from the city staff, will be preparing an analysis for the council. You must determine how the plans meet or do not meet the city's requirements in the development agreement and 2018 resolution in areas including safety, traffic, pedestrians, effect on junction businesses, and public gathering space. But these process questions remain. 1, who is preparing the city's analysis, and when will the public see it? 2, when will the public get to ask city staff questions and have them answered? 3, when will the public get to ask the developer questions and have those questions answered? 4, when in the process will the council analyze how this plan aligns with our new commitment to addressing the climate emergency? 5, When will the council analyze how this plan aligns with our commitment to addressing racial equity? 6, when will the council analyze how the economy and the way we value open public space have changed in the pandemic, including reassessing the need for offices and retail? 7, who is going to draft the new resolution, and when in the process will the public see that? And finally, 8, I ask that you make time for Community Vision for Takoma to share our analysis at council, an analysis that is crowdsourced by resident experts. I ask that you schedule a time to hear that presentation in full during a council meeting, followed by a Q&A for your benefit. Again, I know the council is taking this process seriously, and I know you want it to be transparent and fully address the concerns of the community. But to do that, we must go beyond the 3-minute public comment framework and breakout groups. Thank you very much.
Great. Mr. Anderson?
Oh, good evening. I'm sorry, my camera is going in and out, but I'm not that much to look at anyways, I understand. Robert Anderson, Woodland Avenue. On the city website is a contention that the traffic pattern for deliveries made to the co-op using the current configuration was unsafe. The further comment was that the proposed lay-by was a safe alternative. 16 days ago, I wrote the city manager with copies to the council, asking for traffic safety information about the current configuration. In that email, I also noted that the February 2nd, 2021 email from Montgomery County Department of Transportation stated they did not support the lay-by due to safety concerns and violations of county codes using a lay-by. To this date, 16 days later, I have not been given any feedback or information that was requested. I'm again requesting the council and city manager provide evidence that this delivery configuration in place for over 20 years for the co-op is unsafe and that a lay-by is a preferred safe alternative. Does the city have this information? Can we expect it to become part of the public record so that the council and the public can make informed decisions on this project? A number of you talked about Vision Zero and traffic safety. I hope that that comes into play in your assessments. Secondly, in a listserv today, it was mentioned that the lay-by was for the co-op. This is only partially true. While the co-op would receive deliveries through the use of a lay-by, the lay-by is also the delivery area for any and all businesses in the development, as well as the area for trash, garbage, and recycling pickup for the development businesses. That this is shared is documented in the agreement between the developer and the co-op that's on the city website. There may be size or other differences due to the co-op, but the lay-by itself serves the development as well. If you look at the plans, where else could deliveries to the development be? Thank you very much. I yield back my minute.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Let's see, Ms. Carpenter, do we have anyone else signed up for this evening?
We do have Carter Dougherty, who has joined us, who had signed up. He had requested 4 minutes, which you had granted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hey, y'all. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry about that. I just yelled in the microphone. So thank you for this. I hope not to take 4 minutes. I just wanted to make sure I didn't run over and wasn't rushing as I often do at the end of these. Obviously, we're nearing an important decision on the Takoma Junction project, and over the next 3 weeks, we will have the opportunity to hear what the experts in the county and state administration have said, and the city staff as well. I wanted to begin by reviewing a little bit of the political context here, which seems particularly important 7 years on. I just realized I wasn't even wearing reading glasses when this project started, but I am now. And you know, we just came through an election in which the opponents of the Takoma Junction project essentially turned their organization into one that criticized Mayor Stewart in many ways. These critiques were then taken up by her opponent. Many of the most active members became his sort of de facto campaign organization. He made Takoma Junction a big issue. There were scare tactics about the co-op in the end, and Mayor Stewart was reelected by a landslide, 63 to 37%, bigger than even our beloved Jamie Raskin. So we'd like to ask you to please bear this in mind when anyone tells you there's widespread community opposition and when you hear demands to drag out the process. If anything, this was a vote to move ahead here. I'd also like to add something about our discussions on this as we move ahead. Some of you may vote against this. Two of you, council members Kohar and Smith, have done so in the past. That said, I promise you I will not compare you to Republicans who cravenly voted to acquit Donald Trump of incitement to insurrection after January 6th. I won't bring big flashcards with pictograms to tell you how you aren't listening to us. I won't demonize the city staff. And my friend Neil Cohen and I will not encourage anyone else to do that either. We don't need any more of that. We have always encouraged what we call the peaches and cream approach to talking to fellow Takoma Parkers, and that includes our council members, and that'll continue. You'll probably hear some scary stuff about the co-op and the process here. I won't belabor the fact that the co-op isn't opposing this project, but I would like to point out something that I think has gotten lost in the shuffle here, which is that the co-op has thrived during the pandemic, despite no warning and no playbook for how to handle such a thing. So now that we're looking at a development in which the co-op will have plenty of advance notice about what NDC is going to do and what it does in partnership with NDC, I think it's entirely reasonable to expect that the co-op can adapt to what's going to happen and thrive. Finally, I wanted to urge all of us to focus this debate on the specific question that is before us, is that, are we good with this revised site plan based on the council's resolution? You're going to encounter people who want to relitigate everything under the sun, the height of this parapet, the size of the window, the meaning of life. But we don't need to do that. You have a county staff that has brought this proposal to the point where they believe the planning board would approve it. And anything that needs tweaking can be accomplished at the level of administration and permitting. So you have experts, you have a resolution before you. There's a clear plan for moving ahead. So let's get the council's decision on this. It's been a long road. My eyes can't take it much longer. No, that's probably not true. There's probably people who've worn reading glasses for longer than I have. But, let's get a move on, knock on wood, and let's get digging. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe those are all the public comments for this evening. Is that correct, Ms. Carpenter?
Correct, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. So the next item we have is council comments. Do we have any council comments this evening? Councilman Searcy.
To be very, very brief. Next Wednesday is the start of the Crossroads Farmers Market on Ann Street. Yay! April 14th is the start, and we'll be starting at 10:30 a.m. So I want to encourage folks to head out to the farmers market and grab some great food. So that's one thing. Another quick announcement on Saturday. I think it's Saturday. Yeah, Saturday. The 17th is Sweep the Creek. And so there will be a group of residents that will meet at Becca Lilly Playground on the 17th at between 9 and 11:30. So I want to encourage folks to go to the farmers market and also to join me with Sweeping the Creek on Saturday.
Great. Thank you very much. Councilmember Smith.
I want to highlight Essex House. They received 150 veggie boxes yesterday. I want to thank Councilmember Siemens for all his assistance, helping with Essex House and other buildings in the ward. Ms. Fraser, Jackie Fraser, was able to procure 235 books for residents from Adventist Community Services. That was excellent. She also gave out cleaning kits for residents for Easter. I really thank her for doing that. I would like to pivot and thank Council President Tom Hucker for getting the Windows Guard legislation across the finish line. I want to thank all the other members of the council as a whole for supporting this legislation. This is very, very important for all of Montgomery County. There are few times that you can actually propose legislation that will protect people, that will save lives, and this is one of those occasions. Thank you, Council Member Tom Hooker.
Great. Next is Councilman Kostick and then Dabala.
Thank you. Just a couple of updates. I have scheduled a number of Ward 3 sessions to talk about and hear from residents with regard to the Takoma Junction project. The first of those is this Thursday, April 8th at 7 p.m. And that is for the neighborhoods of BF Gilbert and SS Carroll. I've actually had a couple of questions from people, particularly from SS Carroll, who don't know what neighborhood association they're in, which is totally understandable. I live in SS Carroll and did not know I lived in SS Carroll for a long time. So please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about where you would best fit in these meetings. And I think it illustrates the differing levels of engagement in our neighboring associations, neighborhood associations, and it's actually a really interesting thing we should explore some more. The next one will be on April 20th at 7 p.m. for the WACO Neighborhood Association, Circle Woods, Pinecrest, and Boyd Carroll. And then on April 22nd, I will have one at 7 p.m. for Poplar and Columbia Avenues, and at 8 p.m. for Sycamore, Grant, and Carroll. So contact me, please, if you have any questions about that. There are signups for the Zoom meetings. And I also sent out a feedback form link, which apparently the link was not working originally. Hopefully it should be now, but hopefully people can fill that out and provide some questions if you have them or feedback on the project. That would be great. I'm also separate from the Junction Project, moving to other topics. I'm also working with Councilmember Lewis George's staff. Really appreciate her assistance in getting some information from DDOT regarding the Eastern Avenue project, which we have been waiting for a long time and have had some trouble getting information about. And so we're working on scheduling a meeting and getting some more information, and I hope to have that information soon, and we'll share that as soon as I do. And then finally, the Transportation Planning Board has a meeting on April 21st, where we will have a work session on the project submissions from the Departments of Transportation that have been submitted for the Long Range Transportation Plan, which is called Visualize 2045. Those projects have been posted on their website. I encourage people to take a look, and there's also a public comment opportunity. This is an opportunity to share your thoughts with the Transportation Planning Board. We actually don't get a lot of public comments, and I think it's really useful to hear from people. A couple of the projects are not directly in Takoma Park, but would impact us a lot. For example, the Beltway project and the 270 project are among the projects. And there are also, the Purple Line is a part of the submissions, and a number of other items as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that and share your comments. You can do that at mwcog.org/TPB comment. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilman Dabala and then Kovar.
Yes, thank you. So very quickly, the first thing is to let everybody know that the founder of POSNA here in Takoma Park, parents of special needs adults, was honored this past weekend with a proclamation from the state praising her for all the intense work she's done and dedication she's shown to this issue and to her persistence in bringing it forward. So I want to let everybody know that that happened, and I'm very excited for her. Speaking of the county, two things on energy that have moved to the county council, which we've been waiting for a while. One is the 2018 International Green Building Code. And I'm a little unclear whether they vote on it or whether it's already adopted, but it's moved to the council. And building performance standards for buildings 25,000 square feet and up has moved from the county executive's office to the county council. So on both of those will be, I assume the city will be weighing in, and we'll be looking for a county council discussion and vote. And last county announcement, this is Earth Month. You may recall Montgomery County Green Fest was in Takoma Park a couple of years ago. This year it's virtual, and there's a month of really interesting activities. Some of them are for kids, some of them are virtual, some of them are online. I mean, in person, scavenger hunts kind of things. There's a connection to the DC Environmental Film Festival, so you can see some films for free. There's a lot of really neat stuff going on, so check that out if you're interested. And last but not least, I'll also be doing a couple of community meetings in April, both on the junction and the budget. And the first one is Thursday, the 15th. It's a neighborhood association meeting for Long Branch Sligo. The other two are the next week, the 20th and 22nd, in the Forest Park neighborhood and in the original Saska neighborhood. And I'll have details on listservs and in my newsletter, but I want to just mention it quickly since it seems we're coming up on those dates pretty quick. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. A few quick things. One of the things that the city manager mentioned in the discussion of the budget was tax duplication, and the county is in their county council is in their budget process now, and several residents as well as the mayor have presented testimony before the county council recently. And I really encourage residents to do the same thing. You can submit written comments in. You might not know what to say. So I would suggest, since the mayor made a great statement, just contact me and I'll send you her statement, and you can send it along to them and say, like she said, because they really don't hear from residents that much, and they tend to think of, and I saw this in one of the comments that one of our residents shared, which I can also share with folks if the person's willing, and made the point that the council thinks of Ward 1, if you want to know the truth, when they think of often when they think of these kind of financial topics when it comes to Takoma Park, and they don't understand the diversity, economic and in other ways of the community, and don't appreciate how significant and important it really is. And I'm not trying to tout Ward 1, I'm just saying that it's really important to get across to them the point that we really need to address this structural budget problem. So that's one thing. Contact me if you're interested in that. Second, there's a cleanup day coming up on this Saturday, Takoma Community Cleanup. It's being led by the Old Takoma Business Association. It's this Saturday, the 10th, from 9 to 11 a.m. And you can go to one of three places: the Roscoe Statue, Morrison Park, or the Triangle Park, which is over on 4th Street on the district side of Old Town. And they'll give you bags and gloves and things like that. So I've done it before, and it's a surprising amount of trash you pick up. And once you do it once, you can't walk through the area without constantly seeing trash and picking it up. So it's good training. Two other things. I've got some events coming up also about the budget and the junction, and I'm not going to say them now, but I'll send out a separate note about that. But it looks like a very busy April. Let's just say that. And lastly, we did hear from Ms. Cordes from North Takoma about the Tower Commission. And I do think it's important for us to find some time, because the Tower Commission, this is on the placement of cell towers, meets monthly, and our own Darrell Braithwaite from Public Works is a member of it. And I think we ought to spend a little time seeing if we can come up with some clearer policies and guidance about how our participation in that should work, because I at least do share some of the current concerns that have been raised by residents about the process, and in particular the reality that the county doesn't currently actually measure the actual emissions. They just do a modeling of that. And I think that and some of the other procedural aspects we might want to take a closer look at. So thank you.
Great, thank you. have a couple of things. If you do the cleanup on Saturday, make sure to stop by Girl on the Vine because there's a spring art fair in Takoma Park on Saturday. I think it starts at 11 a.m. and some of our city staff actually have some artwork in the event. So not going to spoil who it is. You need to go and kind of guess who the city staff is and check out their artwork. But that's happening also this weekend. As Councilmember Kovar said, I did testify last night and I'm working hard to contact members of the County Council regarding tax duplication. I can't stress enough how important it is for residents also to contact their county council members, particularly Council President Tom Hucker, as well as the at-large members. If you need their contact information, please let us know. We're happy to give that to you. Emails to their direct offices. And if you have one of their staff people, that's great. And if you happen to have their phone number, give them a call. But it's really important they hear from us right now. I want to send to my colleagues on the council yesterday. There's a group of Montgomery County mayors that we meet monthly, and we met yesterday in our virtually, and our topic was a presentation from Gwen Wright, the planning department, and some of her staff talking about their efforts on attainable housing. It was a really interesting presentation thinking about, I see Councilwoman DeBala is like, oh, attainable housing. What does that mean? It is different than affordable housing. And it was also a great presentation that I will circulate to everyone. And I think that this might be a good thing to ask their staff to come back and maybe do a presentation for us, because I think it's important for us to think about what they're doing at the county level in the planning department. But I'll make sure to circulate the presentation to everyone. And it's also, everybody can get it. It's actually on the planning department's website. They're doing a number of meetings around the county on this. To stay on the topic of housing, on Sunday afternoon from 3 to 5, Progressive Neighbors is holding, I don't know if they're calling it a forum or a conversation on housing. The county executive will be there, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, myself, Councilmember Jawando, and a couple of other people will be there. And you can get information, I think, on their Facebook page, or again, email me and I can send it to you. I think those, for the moment, all the comments I have, and I know the city manager has some comments, in particular going to speak to the tragic event that took place early this morning over on New Hampshire Avenue, and to update us on that investigation. So turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Early this morning in Takoma Park, 2 persons were shot and later died in an incident involving an off-duty Pentagon police officer. We understand that there is tremendous public interest in this case. We ask that the public remain patient as we fully investigate the incident. We continue to work closely with Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office to review and investigate the case. We are handling the matters correctly and without delay. It's critical that we handle this correctly. Thank you again for your patience on this. And I'll just note that we'll try to get information out as soon as possible. I have seen a lot of information out that's not correct, so please be patient. We have obviously great concern. And also we've reached out to the folks in the neighborhood to offer our support to the folks in the neighborhood. Mayor, you mentioned about tax duplication. One very effective way to get people's attention is tweeting, which I apparently did. So as people have any concern about my proposal to increase the tax rate in Takoma Park, it is precisely related to the fact that we have not had steadily increasing rebate payments on a formula schedule from the county. and we cannot absorb it. And so this isn't something that is invisible, it is actual, tangible, and we need to have it addressed. So whether it's tweeting or it's calling or it's showing up at the meetings, we really need to have people speak out. Switching to COVID-19, all residents 16 years of age and older can now be vaccinated in Maryland. People, please get vaccinated. Do you want a hug? Do you look forward to traveling? Do you want to go to church or go to a Nats game? You should be vaccinated to protect yourself and others. And please do whatever you can. We're also working to try to make sure that vaccinations can be brought to you. But please don't wait. There are spikes going on right now with the new variants. This is not the time to get sick. This is the time to get vaccinated. This Saturday, there will not be COVID testing in Takoma Park because we're having a fitness expo. So if you do need to have COVID testing, please go to the Montgomery County website and check the Montgomery County testing sites for the nearest location. Each week, the city's COVID-19 dashboard is updated, and please keep tabs on that. We've got very interesting information all the time, and new information gets added. Wanted to give a few Recreation Department updates. They had extravaganza last week, Friday and Saturday. 19 businesses participated, and I'm so excited that people got to go into the businesses and say hippity hop and get these little plastic eggs with treats in them. And a number of the businesses were really delighted that parents came in and also bought things, and it was a nice way to connect. So it's not the same as the egg hunt, but it was a good opportunity to share the love. As I mentioned, this Saturday from 9 to 1 is the Fitness Expo at the Recreation Center. There'll be short fitness demonstrations, and there'll be health and fitness affiliated vendors there. So please stop by. Obviously, it'll be handled very safely, but we do. Some of us really need to get back in shape. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to offer. And you can go sweep the creek first, and then come over to the Fitness Expo. So there's things you can do. We are gearing up to before and after care programs in Takoma Park, which start on Monday. Our recreation staff have been in the city building all week doing trainings, doing extra work, learning how to function within the COVID-19 protocols. I'm very pleased with the amount of attention and care that they are giving to this. And I'm looking forward to seeing kids around the building again. So that's something that we're really encouraging. We do have some registrations still open for that, and we have some for summer camp. One of the things that we're doing because of COVID-19 and the financial impacts is that we're allowing people who've been affected financially from the pandemic to have free or low cost classes. And we're very liberal with that. It is part of what is likely to be funded with the ARPA funds. So we are giving preference to people who really need that care at low cost or no cost. So please, if that's something you're interested in for your families for the summer particularly, please go on our website and look to sign up, or give a call to the Recreation Department to find out how to do that. That's all I have for us today.
Thank you. Any questions for the city manager? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our voting item tonight. It is a second reading ordinance approving FY21 budget amendment number 5. This is a second reading. There were no changes since the first reading. Would someone like to move the ordinance? Councilwoman Costick moved. Do I have a second? Councilmember Kovar, any questions, comments, discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, next we'll move to our work sessions this evening. Our first is the continued discussion of committees, and I am turning it over to Council Members Dabala, Searcy, and Costick to take us through this.
Yes, Councilmember Searcy is going to bring up the slides, I hope. And I'm going to start us off. We're going to tag team it again like we have in the past. And so this is our fourth update. Next slide. We want to recap what we've done up until now, just to remind you where we are in the process here. And we want to focus tonight on recommendations for the 8 quasi-judicial and regulatory committees that the city has, both on purposes for those committees, purposes and charges, and on the common structure for those committees. Next, please. So just to remind you where we're at, we had recommendations last summer from the working group, and the 2 that we're focusing on today: review the purpose of the committees and starting to talk about establishing a common structure for all standing committees. Still to come. Next slide, please. Still to come are looking at code changes, training, administrative functions, and the all-important questions of recruitment and exploring ways to increase diversity. We'll be having, I'm sure, at least one work session on that topic, especially based on the kind of conversation we had today. I heard some really useful thoughts for those committees that we do want to continue, assuming we want to continue any, how we go about recruiting and identifying people to serve on them. But that's not tonight. Tonight, we're sticking to purpose and charge of committees, particularly the quasi-judicial and regulatory committees, and a bit about the structure and size for those. Next slide. And I think this is where I turn. Oh, okay. So sorry, I don't have my slide numbers. So I'll just remind us that we talked about a revised charge for the different committees. And so as we see it, providing the council with tangible recommendations specific to a priority of the council or a regulatory function, to leverage residents' technical expertise and their lived experiences, to ensure that the council has regular and timely information that we need to do what we need to do, and to create that opportunity to engage residents in a collaborative, long-standing process on issues that are important to them, and enable them to be bridges on education and engagement in priority areas. We also, next slide, please. We also had established several factors to prioritize the need for specific standing committees. So you'll hear that we worked through these factors in reaching our conclusions, our recommendations about the 8 quasi-judicial and regulatory committees. So does the work support a council priority or a continuing structural purpose? Is the issue well addressed by a standing committee, as opposed to any of the full range of community input, engagement, and collaboration techniques we heard about earlier? Ongoing attention needed on the issue. Is this something that requires long-term commitment, not just a one-shot deal? Staff capacity to support the project, the committee. And then to a little lesser extent, the need for technical expertise and lived experience for that issue. Whether the issue is seen by residents as relevant and important to their lives, and is there an existing entity that can do the work? And I will turn it over now to Councilmember Costick to talk about the 8 committees and what we did and the first set of recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone again. So we looked at the 8 quasi-judicial or regulatory committees. These, as I think everyone knows, are committees that serve a regulatory purpose. Many of them hear cases, such as in the case of the Tree Commission, hearing appeals, or COLTA. Others, like the Board of Elections, are responsible for the city elections, and Ethics Commission. Many of these serve very critical functional roles in the city. And what we did was we looked at these committees and we reviewed them against those priority factors that Councilmember DeBala just went through. We also consulted with staff who work with these committees and with individual members of each of the committees to get their sense of how things are going on the committees, what roles they play, what might be needed. And then we have started to consider structural issues, and we'll get into that a little more in a little bit. But we considered, here we're talking about structural issues from the concept of creating kind of a common structure for all committees where we have similar term limits and similar term lengths and limits and kind of number of people on committees. So next slide, please. So our recommendations with regard to these 5 committees, the Board of Elections, COLTA, Ethics, Police Pension Board, and the Tree Commission, are that we retain these committees and their purposes, so keep them relatively similar to what they have been doing. Appoint new members with, as we all know, at the end of June, all of our members' term limits end. And so we are hoping to have a recruitment process, and we'll have, as Councilmember DeBala said, we will talk a little more about what type of process we can do. And I think there were great recommendations earlier tonight to make that process better. So through that process, we would then recommend appointing new members to each of these committees. And when I say new members, I don't mean at the exclusion necessarily of members who are on those committees, but we would basically have to appoint members again. And then work with each of these committees after those reappointments on some more specific issues that have come up that don't necessarily impact their functionality as a body, but are important to consider and improve on kind of a rolling basis over the next year or so. Next slide, please. So I believe I'm doing the slide too. If I'm not, stop me. So here is a kind of a matrix where we went through and showed each of the committees some of their purpose, and then some key issues that came up as we were going through. The Board of Elections, as we know, manages city elections. Some of the issues we would recommend working with them on through our conversations with board members and staff post reappointments and appointments on that committee. And also in this case, it's a little bit of a different timeline because I think they actually will bring election code changes to us prior to then. But they are planning on bringing some suggested election code changes to the council to consider. So we would recommend considering those. And then the board has also noted that they plan to look at their bylaws again, things like the term limits for committee chair and those sorts of things, which would be a part of their bylaws. For COLTA, this COLTA hears cases on landlord-tenant relations, rent increases, and rental licensures, and advises on rental issues. One of the issues that we'd like to work with them on post-appointment is considering their educational and advisory roles. So one of the things that came up is the role that COLTA can play in educating and doing outreach on laws related to landlord-tenant relations and tenant rights and those things. So we'd like to work with them on that some more. The Ethics Commission issues opinions on ethics questions and ensures that the city complies with state law. One of the recommendations that came up to look at a little more closely with the Ethics Commission is to review some of the timelines for issuing opinions to ensure that there's adequate time and that the regulations aren't too restrictive with regard to how that happens. The Police Pension Advisory Board manages the Police Pension Fund. And in this case, this is a somewhat different committee than most of the others. In this case, there are, I am forgetting exactly how many members, I want to say maybe 9, but only 2 of those are actually city residents. And from our understanding, this seems to be a fairly technical review process that's really focused on reviewing the fund and the investments made through the fund and those sorts of things. And there are only 2 residents on that committee. So we haven't recommended significant changes there. The Tree Commission then finally hears appeals on tree permit decisions and advises on tree code and educates residents. Somewhat similar to COLTA, we also would like to look a little more closely at the role for this commission in terms of education and advocacy. So we have had a lot of conversations with staff and committee members with regard to the importance of separating the quasi-judicial committees from an advocacy role, because it is so important that they are impartial, but that they could still do education and outreach where it is focused on the regulations and the laws and the processes and those sorts of things. So we could work together with the commission on their recommendations with regard to code revisions on education versus advocacy. And I will now turn it over to Councilmember Searcy.
Great, thank you so much. So there were a couple of recommendations related to 3 committees in particular, where we have recommendations that are more aligned with very specific next steps based on what we heard, not only, again, as Councilmember Costick mentioned, from staff, but also what we heard from the committee members themselves. And so those 3 are the Noise Control Board, Personnel Appeals Board, as well as the Facade Advisory Board. So the Personnel Appeals Board, if I could say that, here's appeals of non-union city staff. And what we heard was that they haven't met. No cases were heard. There are no residents that are currently appointed on the committee. And so what we actually suggest and believe that the city staff is working on is creating an alternative approach to hearing those staff appeals. So we recommend eliminating this board from our list and allowing staff to come up with a process for adjudicating any appeals or staff or personnel related issues. The second board is the Facade Advisory Board. And what they currently do is they advise the commercial facade designs in the historic area of Old Town. And one of the things that we heard from the FAB is that they would like to get rid of their formal review role. Basically what they do right now, let's say a business would like to have a new awning. The Facade Advisory Board typically would do quite a bit of back and forth with that business owner, approve that process, and then the business owner has to go beyond to the county as well. So it was kind of duplicative. And so what they actually recommended was to eliminate, in essence, their quasi-judicial function, which is approving those facades before, or those facade designs before they move forward to the county, and instead focus on perhaps offering optional consultative services to businesses around the historic nature or other things that they may be interested in doing that might go beyond the traditional sense of what the Facade Board has done, such as providing facade input, not just as it relates to the historic area, but beyond that. So what we propose to do is to further consider their purpose with other standing committees. So in our mind, given that they are suggesting to remove their quasi-judicial function, we want to accept that recommendation and then revisit their purpose when we are looking at other committees that have non quasi-judicial, they don't have a quasi-judicial function.
And then the last is the Noise Control Board. And what they do is they hear two-party noise complaints and they advise on noise issues. We had an opportunity to talk with members of the Noise Control Board. I talked to former council member Fred Schultz, who led this effort, as well as Rick Bearvecchia, the head of neighborhood services. And so what we heard was that there is a role, so to speak, in terms of what this board does. It really is more in the case of mediation. I think they do more mediation functions where you may have perhaps a commercial business or church or someone where there's a consistent problem with noise. And so what this group does is bring both parties together in order to reach an agreed upon resolution. What we would like to recommend is to review that regulatory role within a broader context in terms of discussions on code enforcement and public safety. Right now, noise is one of the code enforcement issues that has a committee, but there may be other issues that kind of don't. And so we wondered how this fits into the larger structure as it relates to public safety. And also, what we may hear from the Public Safety Task Force in terms of how to adjudicate and deal with these types of issues going forward. So we will seek Public Safety Task Force input. So far, there's been 5 two-party complaints received since 2017. So it's used, but not very often. And then also consider the purpose, such as, the educational role. And, we don't know if it's not being used because people don't know about it. It's because it isn't as big of an issue that we think. So there needs to be a little bit more kind of consideration of the purpose. And so what we recommend is to reappoint the current members while additional review continues. Unlike the other examples, what we would like to do is keep them as is through the June deadline. That will give us some time, especially because our Public Safety Task Force recommendations are due in June as well. And also give us some time to kind of consider those recommendations in addition to how we may want to reshape the purpose of this particular committee. So that's our recommendation there, because it's being used, but it could be revamped, and we kind of want to see what that Public Safety Task Force recommendations are before making a final change to the purpose. So as was mentioned, another thing that we are starting to talk about is the structure for the standing committees and whether or not we can establish a common structure. And that common structure includes what is the optimal size, how many members should we have? And one recommendation that we received from the council committee work group was an optimal size of our committees should be between 7 and 9 members, that there should be 2 to 3 or 3-year terms, and they should be staggered for continuity, and that the term limit be 6 years, and that we may be able to reappoint members after a 1-year break, that we try to prioritize residences members, and that for all standing committees, that there is a requirement that there is some sort of code changes, and that we may have some, I'm sorry, I should restate that. To make some of these changes, it may require code changes, depending on what the committee structure is that's actually in the code state. So this is just to let folks know that if we decide to go with a common structure, it might require code changes. And then there's also the possibility for exceptions to the common structure. And so we can kind of talk a little bit about some of the structures that are in place, the recommendations that we have on how we might want to tweak them. And please, colleagues, stop me because I am blanking on how many slides I'm supposed to go through. And I think I'm going through to the end, but I'm not sure.
I think I'm supposed to take the next one. But
okay,
you're more than welcome to if you would if you're on a roll, go for it.
No, I will hand it over. Okay, so for the quasi judicial committees that we talked about earlier, the ones that, again, are in that bucket of the purpose with a few minor tweaks, but the quasi-judicial function is still going to be there, is the Board of Elections, COLTA, Ethics Commission, Police Pension Board, the Tree Commission, and for right now, the Noise Control Board, albeit they're a special case. So for the Board of Elections, COLTA, the Ethics Commission, the Police Pension Board, and the Tree Commission, what we're recommending is a common structure where there's a common size of 7 to 9 members, common terms. Again, that's 2 3-year terms, and that there's a common term limit. So once folks serve their term, they could take that 1-year break. I just want to reiterate the point about the Noise Control Board. What we're actually recommending is that we reappoint those current members while those additional reviews happen. So I just want to make sure that that is in mind. So with that, I will turn things over, I think, to Councilmember Kostic, right?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. I don't think that there's anything particularly new here compared to what Councilmember Searcy was saying, but this just sort of shows you what the current number of members are and the current term limits, and then compares that to our recommendation. So the Board of Elections are currently up to 7, and they have 3-year terms with no term limits. In this case, this is actually the one case where we're recommending an exception to the 2-term 6-year term limit. The board members felt, and we talked with the city clerk as well, who recommended the same thing, that having 3 term limits for Board of Elections members, or 3 terms, so a total of 9 years, was better to allow for people to kind of have some experience working on elections and be able to share that experience. And I will also note that the members said in most cases, people do not stay that long, but where there have been people who do, it can be really beneficial. So COLTA, there are 7 to 11 residents right now, 7 to 11 members, up to 4 of them can be non-residents. And we're again recommending a common structure with the 3-year terms with 2 term limits, a limit of 2 terms. And then in terms of structure, we recommend considering the role of the non-resident property owners as members. That's a recommendation that came from staff, and we'd like to look at that a little more closely. Ethics Commission, again, common structure is a recommendation. The Police Pension Advisory Board, again, it's a little bit different because there are only 2 members who are residents, but there are 7 total members, and we would recommend, again, having a common structure where there are term limits and the 3-year terms for the residents. For the Tree Commission, there are currently only 5 members, so the common structure would increase that to 7, somewhere around 7 to 9, and would add the term limits on the 3-year terms. Noise Control Board, there are currently 5 to 7 residents that actually already have the term limits that we are recommending. Again, our common structure recommendation is to have 7 to 9 members for 2 to 3-year terms and a 2-term limit, except in cases where there is another alternative exception due to the functions of that committee. So I will turn it over now, I believe, to Councilmember Dvala.
So the key takeaways are that we want to retain 5 groups. We are convinced that they serve a very they serve us an ongoing structural function. All those things we talked about before. It's an issue that's a priority. There's a clear reason for them to be doing what they're doing. In long-term involvement of a group of residents makes a lot of sense. I would like to pause and just say that we were impressed, all of us, with the quality and the dedication of all the individual members of committees that we talked to. And it's really pretty amazing how well individual committee members function in what we've already discussed, as a system that could use a little improvement. But individuals who dedicate themselves to the work of a particular committee, it's been really awesome to get to talk to these people and get their perspectives. With these 5 groups, I think, we're good to go with some structural changes. We would like to discontinue the one group that has essentially not been active for many years. And we'd like to reconsider one group with the other non-regulatory standing committees and see how its purpose would blend or fit with the other committees and the priorities that this city council has, and see what emerges from that discussion. And we would like to reconsider that one group, the Noise Control Board, in the broader context of public safety, as we said. So that leaves us also with adopting a common structure. It seems to be useful for the 5 groups, the 7 to 9 members, 2 3-year terms. The one exception being the Board of Elections. And next, I think, Councilmember Cersei, do you want to do this or do you want me?
You can keep on rolling.
I'm on a roll.
Yep.
So just to close out. So that's what we recommend. This is how it fits in with the work that we have to do between now and June 30th. I won't go through it because it's getting late, but you see there's a fair amount to do. And I think our last slide is a thank you and asking for questions. Should we back up 2 slides to see whether there's any questions about the recommendation? Let's put the slides away and let's see whether there are questions and comments from, well, first of all, if Councilmember Cersei or Costick have anything to add, or if we have comments and questions from the other council members. And next week, I think we'll be back looking for your tonight discussion. But next week, looking for a sort of a thumbs up about, because to do this requires code changes. Code changes requires the city attorney, and we need to let them know that we want to do this. So, not taking a formal vote, but we do need to send some signals to staff about what we want to see next week. So, comments, questions. Mayor, would you like to do it since you've got the hands and I can't seem to find hands tonight?
Councilmember Kovar has his hand up.
Thank you. Very thorough. Appreciate it. And I'm in agreement with a lot of it. I think the common structure looks really good, and I think it's in line with the things that we've talked about before. The one thing I think there to think about, which is not against the criteria that you put out, but there may be cases where certain specific types of members in terms of expertise or background or what larger group they represent, we may still want to specify in terms of, this committee should always have at least one member who represents this group, another member who's a tenant, whatever. And so I assume those kinds of things would still be possible, even with the general criteria that you've outlined. So that's one thought. The second one is for the 3 that you're talking about changing. I agree with that personnel appeals board, and I think that might have emerged, well before I was ever on here. Maybe when our HR department was a little bit less robust, and they were looking for some way to deal with that. So hopefully that works through that. And I think the noise control board, I thought you mentioned not only in the context of the task force on the public safety, reimagining public safety task force, but also any work we might do on code enforcement changes. And I think that makes sense. I'm a little bit less sure about the facade advisory board because they're not, as I understand it, they're not exactly a regulatory or quasi-judicial body even to begin with. I think they just provide advice. And then the advice, ultimately a decision is made more formally when it goes to the county through the preservation board. So I don't know about that. And we can talk about how useful that is. But the second part about them providing advice more broadly, I'd have to have a clearer idea for what that would mean. Because, for example, for businesses in the, say in the Crossroads area, I mean, the CDA already does some of those kinds of things. And so arguably, and I could be talked out of it, but arguably there's a very specific thing connected to the historic areas, which is what they've been doing. So I've seen the letter that they sent, so I understand they're looking at making that change. I'm not quite sure my mind wraps fully around the board's vision for this other role. So that's just where I am.
So to just respond really quickly, there's, if you will, two different directions, and one is the historic and one is the economic development. And do either of these fit with some of the other purposes that other committees have? And I don't think we meant to say make the facade advisory committee broader, that we had somehow agreed on that. I think that we were trying to say that that is absolutely up for discussion. The first part is taking their recommendation about the usefulness or not of doing those recommendation letters to the county.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you've already made a decision. And I would say also, I mean, I've talked in the past, and others have too, about having a little economic development committee that could maybe provide the type of advice. And I know this is not the time when we're looking to expand our roster of committees, but you can imagine that. And the only other thing I'd say is just more broadly on your schedule, and I mentioned this before, I'm just a little nervous about when we're going to get to the diversity discussion, because I'm just not sure there's time to have that discussion, to do all those things, and then to get people in by the end of June. So that's the only part about the schedule that gives me a little pause.
You're not the only one.
Leave that.
We're dancing as fast as we can. Okay. I hear you on that.
I think one thing that's important to know,
I know. Yeah.
and kind of going back, and I don't want us to start talking about economic development committees, or should the facade board be one, or whether or not. One of the things that I will say when we were talking about, the facade advisory board's recommendation is really asking a very hard question about why. And I think that's a question we should ask ourselves. These surprisingly are easier, right? And we still had a lot of back and forth and disagreement. Wait till we get to the other list, right? And so it could very well be the case, like even if we're talking about economic development board or committee, why? Why do we need people volunteering their time? What purpose? Is it beneficial to the business community to have another hurdle to go through? Are they going to provide them any money? How do they overlap with other things that we already have in place? OTBA, CDA. Are they duplicating staff work? So now you have a committee that has to be ran by staff to second guess the job of staff. So it creates this really weird dynamic. And so as we're going through those criteria, it creates some areas where it's a difficult question to ask. And your point about diversity, I think Councilmember Dabala raised a really good point earlier about, quite frankly, getting our butts in gear. So for the 5 that are quasi-judicial, we know we want to stay, we need to move forward with the code and make sure that purpose is clear. And there's nothing to stop us from having trains on different tracks. If these are the ones we know right now we want to keep, we start working with the city attorney to get the necessary changes in the code, then that doesn't preclude us at all from working with staff to make sure that we're kind of moving some of that administrative stuff and getting that rolling while simultaneously starting to think about recruitment strategies. So I think that's important. I think one of the things that's really important in order to get to that point of recruitment is not necessarily that we finalize all of the code stuff, but that we really know that this is a committee we want, this is the purpose, this is something we need and why, so that we can effectively communicate that to folks and get them to want to volunteer.
We had this discussion about the noise board too.
Mm-hmm.
Why? And it's a tough question to ask, especially when the why is written in code and is internally consistent to itself. Makes a great deal of sense if you're just looking at that little piece. But looking at it in the broader, speaking of the noise board, looking at it in the broader public safety context, makes a fair amount of sense with the Public Safety Task Force working right now. So not to say we agree or disagree with your reaction to the facade board's letter, but to just say that that's exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I got a question regarding COLTA. There's a proposal for members of the commission to educate the public. How is that going to work when you have people with three, I'll say, different interests on the commission? You have residents who are tenants, you have residents who are landlords, you have those people that don't live in the city that are landlords. How do you ensure that people that are talking to other members of the public are all on the same page? Because that's the uniqueness about COLTA. Landlords have their own interests, and so do tenants. And a lot of times they do not commingle.
Yeah, I think that's, if I could chime in, I think that's a really great question. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of have struggled with as we've looked at the role of whether it's COLTA or the Tree Commission or others doing outreach, because as you pointed out, this one is particularly unique because there are such different perspectives. But if committee members are doing outreach on policies, they definitely need to be doing it in a way that is consistent and accurate and drives people to the correct information. We talked a little bit with Grace about this role, and as we sort of look at what that might involve, I think it'll be really useful to talk with her about what thoughts she has on it, to talk with the current COLTA members on what that might look like. And I think the Noise Control Board did something, I think it was a year or two ago, where they created a brochure basically explaining what the noise ordinance says and what the Noise Control Board does. So it might be that sort of thing where there's a brochure or documentation or information that is maybe pre-written that is shared out to sort of help manage what information goes out. But that's definitely something I think we need to pay close attention to.
COLTA, I mean, when I was there, we had documentation that went out to residents, and whether you're a landlord or a tenant. So you're saying the commission doesn't have that anymore, or is it being updated?
I'm not really sure about that. I think that's a question we'll have to follow up on.
I'm under the impression that they don't, either they don't have it or they don't use it. And to be clear, our suggestion is not, is not that we all decide this tonight, but that we throw it back to the staff and COLTA and ask them to tell us what they think is going to work, because they appear to have already been talking about it. Give them an opportunity to do the kind of thing that the facade board did, which is to come up with a suggested plan forward. If that helps any.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So thank you for this. I know I can't, it's a huge amount of work, and thank you to all three of you for having these conversations. I think these recommendations look great. I think they're the direction we need to move in. The one question I had, I just want to make sure I understood, and I think it was the slide where you were talking about the Board of Elections, and it said that they're going to review their bylaws. And one of the things in thinking about having a common structure that we have talked about in the past is that the committees, and some of them may have to change, but like that the bylaws would also be similar for all the committees, because one of the things I think we also run into right now, and that this is a burden on staff, is how they function in terms of meetings, like do they have a president, a chair? Like, what are they, is that person elected? Is it like, and all of that is different and contained in the different bylaws. So not to add to the plate of things to work on, but I do think having, taking that on, thinking about having maybe there's like a template of bylaws that each committee adopts. And then if there needs to be, for, or some reason, a slight change, that the committees can consider that. But I think that maybe just something else to think about adding.
That was one of the recommendations of the working group, was there be a standard set of bylaws. So when they come in to talk with us about the training and administrative piece, that would be a great time to ask that question.
Yeah. So, but otherwise, I think I didn't have any other questions. I really do think it looks great, and a lot of thought has gone into it. So very supportive of the direction you're taking. Thank you. So, all right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So we will come back to this next week. If you want to circulate the PowerPoint so people can look at it a little bit more. Again, we are on a tight schedule. So if you do have any reservations or concerns or questions, maybe ask them before next week so that we can try and get answers to them, because I think you all want a thumbs up or thumbs down on moving forward, particularly with the 5 committees and tasking the city attorney to make the appropriate code changes. So just saying, be prepared to do that next week. So great. We have 2 other work sessions that I think are pretty much updates. I'm going to take the first one. I just want to give people a quick update on the city manager search. As a reminder, tonight's a reminder of the city manager leaving. We're getting to that point where it's going to be, this is the last of this. Our city manager is retiring this year. So on July 1st, we've begun this process. We began in the fall and really undertook it beginning in January. As people will remember, we've hired a firm to help us with an executive search firm to help us with the recruitment, held a community conversation in February, launched an online survey, which is now closed and got over 382 responses, which we'll compile and share with everybody. We did 2 stakeholder focus groups, and to date, and I think this is going to be, pretty close to a final number, we have 58 applicants have submitted their applications. So moving forward, as I mentioned at the beginning of our meeting, on April 21st, we will be having a closed administrative session to go over the applicants, talk to Catherine, who is the executive search person we hired, think about processes and logistics for the interviews. We are first scheduled to do a series of virtual interviews on May 11th, and then, subject to COVID-19 protocols, in-person interviews on May 17th. But again, figuring out all the logistics for that and processes we will work on during our administrative session on April, I forget what month we're in, 21st. So any questions on that? Yeah, Councilman Dabala.
Yes, my question has to do with the survey results. Will they be available to us in some form before the 21st?
Sure, I could probably, I'm going to say yes, and then...
and then you'll figure out how, yeah.
And then I will see.
Okay.
I don't think that should be a problem, but sometimes when you say, oh yeah, that'll be easy, it's not as easy as you think. We didn't have as many surveys as I would have liked in the different languages we translated in, but we do have a number of them. So just trying to figure out I haven't looked at the
Okay.
open end for those and other things. So that's why I'm, putting everything together. But I think yes.
Thank you.
And we should definitely have it before the first like virtual interviews.
Yeah, I would,
Yeah.
it would be very helpful by the 21st.
Yeah. Anyone else? Cool. All right. I'm kicking it over to Councilwoman Searcy to update us on the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force.
Great. Thank you all so much. So the Public Safety Task Force has been working. So I want to make sure that a couple of things are clear. Just as a reminder for folks, we said in our resolution that the Public Safety Task Force had the ability to form subgroups as a way to really try to target their recommendations around their self-identified priority areas. And so the task force is taking us at our word. It is in the process right now of finalizing the descriptions and focus areas for 3 subgroups. So the full committee met on Tuesday, and their upcoming meeting on next Tuesday, April the 13th, will be subcommittee meetings. So again, they're really trying to flesh out their subcommittees, and those topics, once they're finalized, will come back to the group. But they're definitely looking at housing, broader than just policing. So they're definitely looking at housing, mental health, other types of social service, and how that relates to public safety. They're of course exploring aspects of policing more broadly. They're also looking at data and transparency. So that's another area. But again, those subcommittees will be finalized when the group meets next Tuesday. I also want to make folks aware that the committee will be working on establishing 2 vehicles for public engagement. One will be a comment feature that will be added to the Public Safety Task Force page. So people will have the ability to just plop their comments in there. Another thing that we're working on is scheduling a listening session for the task force. So our consultants are going to work with the task force to figure out scheduling around a listening session where the public can come and provide feedback and information directly to the task force. So they are moving really fast. And so I can also give you a quick update on where they've been thus far. So they've had 4 meetings. And I know that some people may question, only 4 meetings, that's not enough. But if you are living in a virtual environment such as I, you recognize that there's a lot that happens outside of the meetings. And in order to have an effective meeting, you need to do your homework. So they have a lot of homework. Their first meeting was a little bit more of getting to know you, meet and greet. But then their second meeting was a full review of they were provided an overview of the city functions and different departments. They have a folder, which will also be, some documents will be made available, those that can be on the task force website. So you'll see that there's a document, a little link there that says Public Task Force Resource Folder. And that'll include a lot of the information that the task force has received that is publicly available. So we'll make that available. But they've also received a ton of information that is distinct to them that we want them to have the ability to go through. It's a lot of information. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of things that they're going through. So they've been received that overview. They also, in the last meeting, which was a general meeting on Tuesday, the chief walked through tons of traffic data, lots of data, and that data will be made available to the public as well. And thank you to our deputy city manager for working to try to make sure that that dashboard is ready. So there's a lot of things that are happening during non-meeting hours so that the task force will be prepared when they meet to really make some decisions. So right now, there are about, I think, like 6 meetings left. There are 2 additional subcommittee meetings and 2 additional full task force meetings.
and the final report is due by June the 4th. I will say that we have room in our contract, and I just want to make sure and be transparent that we had already worked in extra time in our contract if needed, but we are committed, our consultants are committed, and our task force is committed to meeting the established deadline. So happy to answer any questions that I can. If I can't answer them, I will bundle those up and shepherd them to the folks that can answer them.
Great. All right. I'm not seeing any
Councilmember
hands.
DeBall.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you for that great summary.
Yeah.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
No worries. All of the meetings and the links, because there's a lot of work that went into the website. And so I really want to encourage people to take a look at the public safety page. It includes presentations, all of the recorded meetings that have happened to date, overviews, all of the history. It'll include the public comment feature. So definitely want to encourage people who are interested to keep a lookout at the webpage for more information as it's posted.
Great.
Awesome.
All right. I think, and Councilwoman Susie, I don't know if you said this, but the recordings of the meetings are also on the website. Sorry, you may have mentioned that, but I just also want to let folks know as well, if they want to watch the meetings, there are recordings of them. So it's really helpful as well. Great. All right. Well, we did a lot tonight. It feels a lot later than 10:25. But thank you, everyone. We have a lot to cover over the next 6 weeks. And look out for an update on more on the Takoma Junction development process. There's a couple of things we need to kind of close the loop on and get out to folks. But we definitely presentations on Monday night. So see you again Monday, if not beforehand.
What time Monday night, and how do residents sign up?
They don't need to sign up because it will be, they can watch the meeting just like they would watch any other meeting. I guess scratch that. Never mind. You know what? Just wait for more information tomorrow, because I'm going to say something that's going to be completely wrong right now. So the meeting is, I don't have it in front of me. It's on the website. I don't want to say something that's completely wrong because I'm going to get it wrong. It's on the website, and we will put out more information, more details about the breakout groups and everything by the end of the week. So thank you. All right. Good night.